Well, hey there, and welcome back to this book study on The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haupt. And in our last video, we looked at chapter 6, which focused on the unique way that social media is impacting young girls and women. And now in chapter 7, what we're kind of looking through in this video is the unique way that boys and young men are being impacted by the digital age. The book says that the rise of the digital age has impacted boys just as much as girls, but in very different ways. Now, I understand that we live in a culture that the generalized conversations around the uniqueness of men and women is very frowned upon. But at the end of the day, I'm a believer in a creator God, and a God who created men and women as co-equal, but also very, very different. And even the reality that these social media platforms and that the digital life is affecting girls and boys is in such different ways, to me, is proof that each was wired very differently from birth, right? And in a very simple generalization of boys, like they need adventure. Like boys need to conquer. They need battles. They need wars. They need fantasy. And video games are such a potent outlet for those desires to be channeled through. I mentioned in a previous video, I grew up with video games, but the video games of my day are so different than the video games of today. First off, my video games had a start and an end. And today's video games, many of them have no end, right? Also, my video games were like the whole essence of like 3D virtual, like entering into something. Like you could feel the distance between the television, a gaming console, and you. But that's not how it is with the video games today, where you're literally entering into another world. You're existing in this other world. And it cannot be overstated the impact that gaming has had on a generation of men and these boys in our culture, right? Because a lot of these games have no end. They are just as much a social media platform, many of them, because you are connecting, you're communicating, you might even be getting harassed and bullied, or you're doing the bullying and the harassing of other people in this virtual world. You're posting, you're writing, you're talking. It's very much, many of the games, a social media platform, which also means it'll have the same addictive quality, if not more, than other social media platforms. There is such a need, of just the way that God made and wired boys to engage in the real world, in risky behavior. And that risky play is so vital for their cognitive, emotional, and spiritual growth. Climbing big trees, hiking big mountains, swimming across rivers and lakes, challenges and obstacles, triumph. This is wired into the DNA of men. Then came a generation when the rise of safetyism took the real world risk away from these boys and instead replaced it with a gaming console and the internet. This has not only led to a rapid video game addiction, and you're seeing it across the culture from very young ages and even into now the extended adolescence of men, where video games are playing such a prominent role later and later and later into adulthood. But also the staggering rise of the use of pornography. On page 189, it says, this potentially makes boys who are heavy users turn into men who are less able to find sex, love, intimacy, and marriage in the real world. Right? Research shows, and what Jonathan Howard is really pointing to in this chapter is it's sort of the video games and the social aspects of the video games, the virtual aspects, and pornography that are affecting young boys, young men the hardest when it comes to the digital age. Right? I don't know if you knew this, but the United States is the #1 consumer of trafficked boys and girls, males and females in the world. The #1 consumer, right? The most horrible ways we could treat a human being are available to our kids at a click of a button. And very few boys have safeguards to manage this sort of digital world well. And many young boys and young girls, but overwhelmingly young boys, are being introduced and awakened in a sexual way too soon, beyond any capacity that they can handle the information that is coming at them. There's a quote that hit me on pages 177, 178 that says, a world of floundering men is unlikely to be a world of flourishing women. Boys and girls, men and women, we're intricately linked together. And I think about this reality with my own daughter, that in the future, she's going to want to date and start looking, boys and young men. And frankly, okay, it's not something I want to think about for very long, but it's reality, right? Now, I don't get anxiety from this. I know that my God and the God who loves her and is with her will guide her in that process. But I do agree with that quote. I do agree with that quote. In many ways, in culture today, girls are expected to grow up much faster, and boys are being delayed in the expectation of them growing up. And this dynamic is having huge effects on the nature of relationships, marriages, and the compatibility of men and women in our culture. So what stands out to you as you read this chapter? I've been praying over this, and for me, I just kept being drawn to the bottom paragraph on page 194. The bottom paragraph on page 194, it says, this generation is less able to put down roots in the real world. Communities populated by known individuals who will still be there in years to come. Communities are the social environments in which humans and human childhood evolved. In contrast, children growing up after the great rewiring, the digital age, skipped through multiple networks, whose nodes are a mix of known and unknown people, some using aliases and avatars, many of whom will have vanished by next year or perhaps by tomorrow. I was thinking of this, and just what a gift church community is for our developing youths. How can we as parents prioritize church community over and above digital reality that is so appealing to them? Right? And I'm not trying to just, now I am a pastor after all, so I am going to gloat in church community, because it's in church community I think the best conversations around identity, how we were made, what we were made for. I just think that is the richest community that our kids can be growing roots. And also the reality at least at our church, many of the kids are coming from multiple school districts. And so these are communities that really they can be connected to over the span of years, and connect with kids from lots of different ways, and different communities. So I think all of those are important, but also just how they sink into community in general, right? Now, I'm not a huge fan of the way sports are being used in today's culture, especially on the grounds of the traveling sports and the constant connection to sports and the multiple sports, and the way sports are just absolutely annihilating so much of the family rhythms and the weekend rhythms within families. But I am also a huge lover of sports, and to be on a team and to be competitive and to have adventures. This is very important for boys and girls to find that outlet, right? I think all things in balance, and that is something I see out of balance in our culture, where we're seeing a devaluing of church community and a rising of the value of the sports focus. So again, things in balance, I think, is always going to be best. But again, how can we as parents prioritize these things for the kids? Like, just like with young girls, we need strong men and women to come alongside of these young men and help guide them into adulthood. They need role models. They need mature adults to connect with them and help them and guide them to what it truly means to be a woman of God and a man of God. And I pray that each of you will ask God for wisdom and discernment on how you can use your time well, and how to use that time and that energy to be of immense blessing to the next generation. There might be some of you listening to this, maybe you don't have kids of your own, or maybe your kids aren't living at home anymore. But no matter our age, I can tell you with certainty that there are kids who would blossom with your friendship. Finding ways to support, to mentor, to help our youth is hard, but it's very rewarding in the effort. God has placed all of us in this time and this place with these challenges. I know that our God is not confused, and in many ways, I know we are. That means we need Him to illuminate things for us. So continue a life rooted in the Word of God, a life rooted in love and mercy and grace, but also a life rooted in courage, that we all may help to guide, lead, and mentor this generation that frankly will flounder without it, right? This has been an overview of chapter 7. Again, I pray that this book is just a blessing in your life. And in our next video, we'll do kind of an overview and a reflection on chapter 8 of The Anxious Generation. We'll see you then.